Hello and welcome to the Fighting Moose podcast. I'm your host, Jason Hendrickson. This is a podcast where I retell stories, some fictional and some historical, that can be enjoyed by people of all ages. Today, we take a short break from The Snow Queen and we read about how Peter and Jumper go to school, written by our friend Thornton W. Burgess. It was a few days ago when I was thinking to myself that since my son is off school, he might like to do some podcasts with me. So sure enough, yesterday he asked if he could read an old Mother Nature story for the podcast. So we set up shop in the kitchen at the house and recorded today's episode. He said he wanted to read a 10-minute story, and after all the editing, it ended up being a little short of 20 minutes. That's alright. He won't find out until listening to this tomorrow night. I hope you are enjoying spending some time with your family during this time. I know that I have learned a few things just trying to get some school in during our time off. If you haven't, if you could, please head over to iTunes or wherever you listen to our podcast and give us a review. It would be greatly appreciated. Now, let's turn to today's story. I hope you enjoy. Let's begin.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Go to school. Hardly had jolly, round, red Mr. Sun throw off his rosy blankets and begun his daily climb up and in the blue, blue sky when Peter Rabbit and his cousin Jumper the Hare arrived at the place in the green forest where Peter had found old Mother Nature that the day before. She was waiting for them, ready to begin the first lesson. "I am glad you are so prompt," she said. "Promptness is one of the most important things in life. Now I am very, very busy these days, as you know, so we will begin at once before either of you ask any questions. I am going to ask some myself. Peter, what do you look like? Where do you live? What do you eat? I want to find out just how much you really know about yourself." Peter scratched one ear with his long hind foot and hesitated as if he didn't know just how to begin. Old Mother Nature waited patiently. Finally, Peter began rather timidly. "Of course," he said, "the only way I know how I look is by the way the other members of my family look, for I've never seen myself. I suppose in a way I look like all the rest of the rabbit family. I have long hind legs and short front ones. I suppose this is so I can make long jumps when I am in a hurry. Long hind legs and short front ones." Old Mother Nature nodded, and Peter, taking courage, continued, "My hind legs are stout and strong, but my front ones are rather weak. I guess this is because I do not have a great deal of use for them. Except for running, my coat is a sort of mixture of brown and gray, more brown in the summer and more gray in the winter. My ears are longer for my size than those of most animals. Not nearly as long for my size as my cousin's Jumper's are for his size. My tail doesn't amount to much because it is so short that it is hardly worth calling a tail. It is so short, I carry it straight up. It is white like a little bunch of cotton, and I suppose that is why I am called a cottontail rabbit, though I have heard that some folks call me a gray rabbit and others a bush rabbit. I guess I'm called bush rabbit because I like bushy country in which I live. I live in the dear old briar patch, and I just love it. It is a mass of bushes and bramble tangles, and it is the safest place I know of. I've cut little paths all through it, just big enough for Miss Peter and myself. None of our enemies can get at us there, excepting Shadow the Weasel and Billy Mink. I have a sort of nest there where I spend my time when I am not running about. It is called a farm. I sit in it in a great deal. In summer, I eat clover grass and other green things, and I just love to get over into Farmer Brown's garden. In winter, I have to take what I can get, and this is mostly bark from young trees, buds, and tender twigs of bushes, and any green plants I can find under the snow. I can run fast for a short distance, but only for a short distance. That is why I like thick brush and bramble tangles. There I can dodge. I don't know anyone who can beat me at dodging. If Reddy Fox or Bowser the Hound surprises me away from the dear old briar patch, I run for the nearest hollow log or hole in the ground. Sometimes in the summer I dig a hole for myself, but not often. It is much easier to use a hole somebody else has dug when I want to signal my friends. I thump the ground with my hind feet. Jumper does the same thing. I forgot to save, and I don't like water. Old Mother Nature smiled. You are thinking of that cousin of yours, that marsh rabbit who lives away down in the sunny south, and she said. Peter looked a wee bit foolish and admitted that he was. Jumper the Hare was an interest at once. You see, he had never heard of his cousin. That was a very good account for yourself, Peter, said Old Mother Nature. Now take a look at your cousin, Jumper the Hare, and tell me how it differs from you. Peter took a long look at Jumper, and then, as before, scratches one ear with a long hind foot. In the first place, said he, Jumper is a considerably bigger than I. He has very long hind legs and ears, and his ears are very long in the summer. He wears a brown coat in the winter. He is all white, but the tips of those long ears and those are black because his coat changes, so he is called a varying hare. He likes a green forest where the trees grow close together, especially those places where there are a great many young trees. Here's the biggest member of our family. I guess that is all I know about Cousin Jumper. That is very good, Peter. As far as it goes, said Old Mother Nature, you have made one mistake. Jumper is not the biggest of the family. Both Peter and Jumper opened their eyes very wide with surprise. Also, continued Old Mother Nature, you forgot to mention the fact that Jumper never hides in hollow logs and holes in the ground, as you do. Why don't you, Jumper? I wouldn't feel safe there, replied Jumper, rather timidly. I depend on my long legs for safety, and the way I can dodge around these trees and bushes. I suppose Reddy Fox may be fast enough to catch me in the open, but he can't do it where I can dodge around trees and bushes. That is why I stick to the green forest. If you please, Mother Nature, what is about the cousin who likes to swim? Old Mother Nature's eyes twinkled. We'll get to that later on, she said. Now, each of you hold up a hind foot and tell me what difference you see. Peter and Jumper each held up a hind foot, and each looked first at his own and then the others. They look to me very alike, only Jumper's is a lot longer and bigger than mine, said Peter. Jumper nodded as if he agreed. What's the matter with your eyes? Demanded Old Mother Nature's. Don't you see that Jumper's foot is a great deal broader than yours, Peter, and that his toes are spread apart while yours are close together? Peter and Jumper looked sheepish, for it was just as Old Mother Nature had said. Jumper's foot really was quite different from Peter Rabbit's. Peter's was narrow and slim. That is a very important difference, declared Old Mother Nature. Can you guess why I gave you those big feet, Jumper? Jumper slowly shook his head. Not unless it was to make me different, said he. I'm surprised, said Old Mother Nature. Yes, indeed. I'm surprised. You ought to know by this time that I never gave anybody anything without purpose. What happens to those big feet of yours in the winter, Jumper? Nothing that I know of, excepting that the hair grows out long between my toes, Jumper replied. Exactly, snapped Old Mother Nature. And when the hair does this, you can travel over the light snow without sinking in. It is just as if you had snowshoes. That is why you are often called Snowshoe. Rabbit, I gave you those big feet, and I made the hair grow out every winter because I know that you depend on your legs to get away from your enemies. You can run over deep snow everywhere where your enemies break through. Peter, though he is small and lighter than you, you cannot go where you can. But Peter does not need to depend always on his legs to save his life. There is one thing more that I want you both to notice, and that is that you both have quite a lot of short hairs on the soles of your feet. That is where you differ from your cousin of yours. Down in the sunny south, he has only a very few hairs on his feet. That is so he can swim better. If you please, Mother Nature, why is the cousin of ours so fond of water? Piped up Peter. Because, replied Old Mother Nature, he lives in a marshy country where there is a great deal of water. So he is very nearly the same size as you, Peter, and looks very much like you both. But his legs are not quite so long. His ears are a little smaller, and his tail is brownish instead of white. He is a poor runner, and so in time of danger, he takes to the water. For that matter, he goes swimming for pleasure. The water is warm down there, so he dearly loves to paddle about in it. If Fox chases him, he simply plunges into the water and hides among the water plants with only his eyes and his nose out of the water. Does he make his home in the water like Jerry Muskrat? Asked Peter innocently. Mother Nature smiled and shook her head. Certainly not, she replied. His home is on the ground. His babies are born in a nest, just as Mrs. Peter makes her nest for your babies, and Miss Jumper makes a nest for Jumper's babies. It is made of grass and lined with soft fur, which Mrs. Rabbit pulls from her own breasts, and is very carefully hidden. By the way, Peter, how do your babies differ from the babies of your cousins, Jumper? Peter shook his head. I don't know, he said. My babies don't have their eyes open when they are born, and they haven't any hair. Jumper pricked his ears. What's that? Said he. Why, my babies have their eyes open and have the dearest little fur coats. Old Mother Nature chuckled. That is the difference, said she. I guess both of you learned something. You said a little while ago that Jumper isn't the biggest of your family, Peter. Said, if you please, who is? There are several bigger than Jumper, replied Old Mother Nature, and smiled as she saw the funny look of surprise on the faces of Peter and Jumper. There is one way up to the frozen north, and there are two cousins way out in the great west, and They are much bigger than Jumper, as Jumper is bigger than you, Peter, but I haven't time to tell you about them now. If you really want to learn about them, be here promptly at the sun up tomorrow morning. Hello, here comes Reddy Fox, and he looks to me as if a good breakfast would not come amiss. Let's me see what you have learned about taking care of yourselves. Peter Rabbit and Jumper gave one startled look in the direction of Mother Nature was pointing. Sure enough, there was Reddy Fox, not far away in a hollow log. Peter wasted no time in getting to it. In fact, he left in such a hurry that he forgot to say goodbye to old Mother Nature. But she didn't mind, for she quite understood that Peter's feelings, and she laughed when she saw his funny little white tail disappear inside the hollow log. As for Jumper, he promptly took to his long legs and disappeared with a great bound. Reddy Fox raced after him.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fighting Moose Podcast. Please join us next time as we read another exciting story. Today's music was provided by the artist Analog by Nature, and the audio clips were provided from NASA. For more information to download and or listen to audio or materials from all our recordings, or to contact us, please visit www.thefightingmoose.com, or you can follow the links in the show notes. And as always, try and do a random act of kindness every day.
Mission complete, Houston. After serving the world for over 30 years, the space shuttle's earned its place in history and it's come to a final stop.